Hi folks, my name is Gary Corey. Welcome to Basic Japanese for the Uechi Dojo. The aim of this program is not to try to teach you to speak Japanese. Despite what many marketers would like you to believe, that is far too ambitious an undertaking for a single CD. Instead, I hope simply to introduce you first to the proper pronunciation and terminology for practice in a Uechi Dojo. Next, I'll expand upon these basics to provide you with a bit more comprehensive list of relevant martial arts related words and phrases. In no way is this meant to be an exhaustive resource for the countless terms, words, or concepts necessary to bring you to complete fluency in Japanese. Furthermore, you may find that some of the terms and their explanations differ somewhat from the Japanese you know and use at your school. But such is language. I cannot make apologies for discrepancies in something so dynamic, so alive, and so ever-changing as the spoken word. Well, let's get started. Our first task at hand is to understand the basic pronunciation of the Japanese language. Thankfully, Japanese pronunciation is relatively easy to learn for English speakers. As with English, there are 5 basic vowel sounds: A, E, I, O, and U. However, in Japanese, these are pronounced A, I, U, E, and O. These sounds are combined with 9 basic consonant sounds, and together they form what is called the Japanese syllabatory. Let's give it a try. First, A, as in father. I, as in seen. U, as in flew. E, as in day. And O, as in go. Let's try it again. A, I, U, E, O. Again, these sounds are combined with consonants. Let's go through them all. The first is K, as in ki. Ka, ki, ku, ke, ko. S, as in saw. Sa, shi, su, se, so. T, as in today. Ta, chi, tsu, te, to. Now you might have noticed a couple of differences there. They are chi instead of ti and tsu instead of tu. We also combined with an N, as in now. Na, ni, nu, ne, and no. H, as in hello. Ha, hi, hu, he, ho. M, as in Mr. Ma, mi, mu, me, and mo. Y, as in yes. Ya, you, and yo. R, and this is a difficult pronunciation for many English speakers. It's something between an R and an L. And we come up with the sounds da, di, du, de, and ro. Lastly, we combine with a W as in where, and we get the sounds wa and wo. In addition to these sounds, there is what is called true consonant. What I mean by that is a consonant that is not combined with a vowel. This is the sound N. It's pronounced by making an N sound from inside of the throat instead of with the nose. Long ago, this sound was written using the letter M, and so we find some discrepancies, for example, with kempo or kenpo, which are both the same words, obviously. You also find it come up again, for example, senpai or senpai, which is a senior student in the dojo, or honbu or hombu, which is the head dojo in any organization. There's also a second set of sounds that can be created when words or syllables come together. For example, ga instead of ka. So we would have ga, gi, gu, ge, go. Or za instead of sa, za, ji, zu, ze, zo. Da instead of ta, da, ji, zu, de, do. And note the variations where we pointed out before under the T pronunciations. Also, we have ba instead of ha. So ba, bi, bu, be, bo. And pa instead of ha. Pa, pi, pu, pe, po. In some cases, it's also possible to combine some of the sounds together. So we get kya, kyu, kyo, gya, gyu, gyo, sha, shu, sho, ja, ju, jo, hya, hyu, hyo, bya, byu, byo, pya, pyu, pyo, nya, nyu, nyo, mya, myu, myo, and lastly, dya, dyu, dyo. And there you have it. That's the complete set of standard sounds used in Japanese. Remember that each of the above sounds is a single syllable in Japanese. When pronouncing words, each syllable is the equivalent of one beat, and therefore should be stressed equally when saying multi-syllable words. For example, karate, not as we pronounce it in English, karate. Remember, 3 syllables, 3 distinct sounds, karate. It's also important to note that the syllables in Japanese are said in a monotone voice. Unlike Chinese and some other languages, Japanese is not a multi-tonal language, so its words are best pronounced with equal emphasis on each syllable. Have you got it? Great. Well, let's dive right in with the basics necessary to start a traditional Uechi workout. Here, for your listening pleasure, are the Junbi-undo, or preparation exercises. Okay, going in order, we're going to start with the first Junbi-undo. Again, preparation, junbi, preparation, undo, exercise, Junbi-undo. The first is Ashisaki o ageru undo. The ashisaki is the tip of the foot. Ageru undo. Ageru means to lift. Undo is exercise. So literally to lift the tip of the foot. And that is corresponding with what we call the heel pivot exercise. Ashisaki o ageru undo. The next, heel lift. Kakato o ageru undo. Kakato is the heel of the foot. Ageru means to lift. Undo, exercise. To lift the heel of the foot. Kakato o ageru undo. The next, ankle circles. Ashikubi. Ashikubi is the ankle. Ashi is foot. Kubi is neck. If you can believe it, the neck of the foot. O mawasu undo. Ashikubi o mawasu undo. To rotate or turn the ankle. The next are knee circles. Hiza o mawasu undo. Again, the knee, hiza. Mawasu, to turn or rotate. Undo, exercise. So to turn the knee, exercise. Hiza o mawasu undo. The next, straight leg kicking or leg lifting exercise. I simply say to my class, Ashi o ageru undo, to lift the leg. Some people say, Ashi o mei ue, above the eyes. Naname ni, 45-degree angle or on a diagonal. Ageru undo. So to lift the leg above the eyes and across on a diagonal. Ashi o mei ue, naname ni, ageru undo. The next, waist scooping exercise. Karada o mai ni tausu undo, or to drop the body forward literally. Karada o mai ni tausu undo. That's the waist scooping exercise. The next, trunk twisting or trunk stretching. Koshi no nenten undo. And that literally means to turn or bend the lower back. Koshi is the lower back. Koshi no nenten undo. Or sometimes I say, karada o mawasu undo. That means to twist the body or to turn the body. Karada o mawasu undo. The next, ude o mae, yoko, shita ni nobasu undo. That's literally to lengthen or to stretch the arms forward, sideways, and downward. Ude is arm, mae to the front, yoko to the side, shita ni to the bottom or down low, nobasu, to stretch or to lengthen, undo. Ude o mae, yoko, shita ni nobasu undo. Or I say simply at my dojo, ude o nobasu undo, to strengthen or lengthen the arms, Next, kubi o mawasu undo, to rotate the neck. Kubi is the neck. Mawasu, to turn or to twist, rotate. Kubi o mawasu undo. That's the neck stretching exercise. And last, when those 10 are performed, we finish with Shinko Kyu, or deep breathing exercise. Shinko Kyu. Let's try them together one more time. Number 1, heel pivot. In Japanese, Ashisaki o ageru undo. Ashisaki o ageru undo. Number 2, heel lift. In Japanese, kakato o ageru undo. Kakato o ageru undo. Number 3, ankle circles. In Japanese, ashikubi o mawasu undo. Ashikubi o mawasu undo. Number 4, knee circles. In Japanese, hiza o mawasu undo. Hiza o mawasu undo. Number 5, straight leg kicking. I very simply say, ashi o ageru undo. Ashi o ageru undo. Number 6, waist scoop exercise. Karada o taosu undo. Or more literally, karada o mae ni taosu undo, to drop the body forward. Trunk stretching exercise. In Japanese, koshi no nenten undo. Koshi no nenten undo. Or as I say to my class, karada o mawasu undo. Karada o mawasu undo, to turn the body. Next, arm strikes or arm thrusting. Ude o mae, yoko, shita ni nobasu undo. Ude o mae, yoko, shita ni nobasu undo. Or very simply, ude o nobasu undo. Number 9, neck stretching exercise or neck rolling exercise. Kubi o mawasu undo. Kubi o mawasu undo. And last, number 10, deep breathing. In Japanese, Shinko Kyu. Shinko Kyu. And that does it for our Junbi Undo. Now, before we move ahead to the Hoju Undo, I'd like to take a second and introduce counting, or gore in Japanese. Obviously, when you're working out in the dojo as an instructor, as a student, you want to know the numbers, be able to pronounce them, and understand where and when they should be used. Let's take a second and count to 20 in Japanese. Just take us a moment. Ichi, ni, sam, shi, or yon. Go, roku, sichi, or nana for 7. Hachi, kyu, or ku for 9. Ju. Now, counting higher than 10 is simply a matter of taking 10 and then adding the next number on. For example, 10 and 1 equals 11, and so we have juichi, juni, jusam, jushi, or in some cases, juyon, jugo, juroku, jusichi, or for 17, junana, juhachi, jukyu, or for 19, juku, and 20 is 2 10s, niju. Now, when you're counting fast in Japanese, you don't have to pronounce each syllable. For example, ichi becomes ich, ni, san, shi, go, roku instead of roku, sich instead of sichi, hach instead of hachi, kyu, ju, juich for 11, 12, that's 12. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, 20. Now, in the places where I introduced two pronunciations or two different ways of counting the numbers, specifically 4, 7, and 9, the first pronunciation is generally the most common one. For example, number 4, shi instead of yon. Sichi for number 7 instead of nana. And kyu for number 9 instead of ku. Now, there is one exception. The character for death in Japanese, interestingly, is also read shi. So you find the rank of 4th degree black belt, for example, yondan instead of shidan, which would mean, for example, the death rank or the dead rank. So there are some places where changes need to be made for understanding purposes, but in general, the first pronunciation of the numbers that I introduced is the most common and the one that you should use. I'd like to take a second to introduce an interesting concept in Japanese. They're called counters. They're not completely unfamiliar to English speakers. For example, we talk about a herd of elephants or a loaf of bread. So when we talk about different topics or subjects, sometimes we need different counters ourselves. It's also true in Japanese. For example, the numbers that I just introduced will hold you in good stead when you're counting out push-ups or kicks or what have you. But there are different types of counters that I'd like to introduce you to now. For example, when you're counting repetitions, the suffix kai becomes the designation for the number of times you do something. For example, instead of saying ichi, you might say ikkai, which means one time. Ikkai, 2 times. Nikai, 3 times. Sankai, 4 times. Yonkai, 5 times. Gokai, 6 times. Rokkai, 7 times. Nanakai, 8 times. Hachikai or hakkai, 9 times. Kyukai, and 10 times. Jukai. Another way of counting repetitions is to put the word do after any of the basic numbers. For example, ichido, nido, sando, yondo, godo, rokudo, nanado, hachido, kyudo, and judo, although don't confuse that with the sport of judo. When we're counting hours of the day, we put the suffix ji, which means time or hour. So we get ichiji, 1 o'clock, niji, 2 o'clock, sanji, 3 o'clock, yoji, 4 o'clock, goji, 5 o'clock, rokuji, 6 o'clock, shichiji, 7 o'clock, hachiji, 8 o'clock, kuji, 9 o'clock, juji, 10 o'clock, juichiji, 11 o'clock, and juniji, 12 o'clock. Now, just a quick point on the counting. You may notice that when we use counters, I begin to use the uncommon pronunciation of the numbers that we discussed a moment ago. For example, as I mentioned, instead of shidan, we have yondan. Instead of shikai for 4 times, we have yonkai. Instead of shichido for 7 times, we have nanado. Instead of shiji for 4 o'clock, we have yoji. So we see the uncommon or the less common pronunciation of a lot of the numbers when we use counters in Japanese. Now, to finish up our conversation of counters, I'd like to introduce how to count the kyu or below black belt and dan or above black belt ranks. You should all be very familiar with the fact that in Uechi Ryu we start at the 10th rank, which is a plain white belt, and count backwards to brown belt with 3 stripes, which is the 9th step on our way to 1st degree black belt. Let's introduce them as we go backwards. Jukyu, or 10 steps to black belt. Kyukyu, or 9 steps to black belt. Hachikyu, 8 steps. Nanakyu, 7 steps. Rokyu, 6 steps. Gokyu, 5 steps. That's green belt. Yonkyu, 4 steps. Sankyu, 3 steps. Nikyu, 2 steps. Ikkyu, instead of Ichikyu. Ikkyu, 1 step to black belt. Let's go over those real fast one more time. Jukyu, Kyukyu, Hachikyu, Nanakyu, Rokyu, Gokyu, Yonkyu, Sankyu, Nikyu, and Ikkyu. Now, after we take that big step forward from Ikkyu, we start counting the dan ranks. We start with 1st degree black belt, Shodan. Now, Sho is another way to count 1 in Japanese. Shodan, 2nd degree black belt. Nidan, 3rd degree black belt. Sandan, 4th degree black belt. We've mentioned already. Yondan, 5th degree black belt. Godan. This also sometimes corresponds with the Shihan, or master's rank. Godan, Shihan, master's rank. 6th degree black belt. Rokudan, or corresponding with the master's rank, Renshi. 7th dan, or 7th degree black belt. Nanadan, which is the Kyoshi rank. 8th degree black belt, Hachidan, or Hanshi rank. 9th degree black belt, Kyudan, or Hanshi Se. And 10th degree black belt, Judan. Let's go through them one more time. Shodan, Nidan, Sandan, Yondan, Godan, Rokudan, Nanadan, Hachidan, Kyudan, Judan. That wraps it up for our counters. Let's move ahead to the Hojo Undo. Okay, let's begin the Hojo Undo. We start first with side kicks. Once again, I'm going to introduce the English, then the Japanese term, and try to explain it in a way that's meaningful and easy to understand for you. Once again, side kicks. Sokuto geri. Sokuto geri. Now we hear quite a few people in the United States say Sokoto geri. That is the incorrect pronunciation. Let's do it together. Sokuto geri. Now soko is the foot. To means blade. So literally it's a blade of the foot kick. Geri or keri is a kick. So sokuto geri is the side kick. Number 2, front kicks. Very simply, shomen geri. Shomen geri. Now shomen means to the front, and geri or keri again is a kick. So shomen geri means kicking to the front or front kick. Next in our series of exercises is the mawashi tsuki. Mawashi tsuki. Or some people say the furizuki. That is the round punch, or what some people call the roundhouse punch. Okay, I've heard in some instances it being called the mawashi uchi, which would be the round strike. Okay, once again, let's do that together. Mawashi tsuki. Something that you also might be very familiar with is a mawashi geri. Can you guess what that is? Mawasu, to turn or to go around. Geri is a kick, so it's a round kick. And the mawashi tsuki is a round punch. The next, snapping high blocks with the 4-knuckle or cat's paw punch. That is called hajiki uke hiraken tsuki. Hajiki uke hiraken tsuki. Now, hajiku in Japanese means to snap upward, hajiku. And hajiki uke is a snapping block. Hiraken literally means the even fist, or we can translate that to mean the flat fist. So hiraken tsuki, literally a tsuki is a punch, so it's a punch with a flat or even fist. Our 4-knuckle or our cat's paw strike. So once again, that sequence is called hajiki uke hiraken tsuki. Hiraken. hiraken, even fist. Moving ahead, our front punch or straight punch exercise is shomen tsuki. Shomen tsuki. Once again, shomen as in shomengari, to the front. Tsuki or zuki is a punch. So shomen tsuki. You also hear people calling this the seiken tsuki. Seiken. It's funny, the characters of that in Japanese means the proper fist. So I hope you're all punching properly when you do your seiken tsuki or shomen tsuki. Okay, moving right along. The block, knife hand strike, back fist, and one knuckle fist. All right, now this is a point that I want you all to remember. This is the sole reason why I made this recording. I want you to do this with me. I want you to all start pronouncing this properly. It's soto uke, or outside block. Okay, now you don't often hear that when this is being introduced, but it's soto uke. Shuto uchi, okay, or knife hand strike. Shuto uchi. Ura ken. Let's say that together. Ura ken. Okay, ura means the backside, ken, the fist. So the back of the fist or back fist strike. Now this is the most commonly mispronounced word in Uechi Ryu and a real pet peeve of mine. It is not riken. There's no word like that in Japanese. It is uraken. So let's do that again. Soto uke, shuto uchi, uraken tsuki, shoken tsuki. Okay, shoken, or the little fist. All right, the one knuckle strike. You hear this introduced in the dojos as shuto, uraken, shoken tsuki. Okay, or mispronounced as shuto, riken, shoken tsuki. Okay, let's stop that. Let's do it all together. Soto uke, shuto uchi, uraken tsuki, shoken tsuki. Or as I pronounce it or introduce it in my school, shuto, uraken, shoken tsuki. Are we clear on that? Okay, great. The next exercise, elbow strikes. Hiji tsuki. Hiji tsuki. Hiji is the elbow, tsuki, strike. Okay, hiji tsuki. And then we move into what are called the tenshin exercises, or the turn, block, and kick exercises. The first is tenshin zensokugeri. Tenshin zensokugeri. Tenshin literally means to turn the body. Zensoku, zen means the front. Soku, foot. Geri, kick. So turn the body and kick with the front foot, very literally. Tenshin zensokugeri. Our next is the turn, block, and kick off the back foot. And so the only word that changes there is the middle one. So we have tenshin, turn the body, kosoku, rear leg or rear foot, geri, kick. So turn the body and kick with the rear foot. Let's do that together one more time. Tenshin, kosoku, geri. Tenshin, kosoku, geri. And the last of the tenshin exercises, tenshin, shoken tsuki. Tenshin, shoken tsuki. Can you guess which that one is? It's turn the body and do the double shoken punch. Shoken tsuki, shoken punch. Tenshin, turn the body. Okay, then we move along. And again, this is another one of the reasons why I wanted to put this tape together, because sometimes the misunderstanding of Japanese terms can lead to a misunderstanding of the meaning or the origin of a technique. And this is true of the next, what we call the fishtail blocks. All right, now in Japanese, it's called koi no shippo uchi tate uchi. Koi no shippo uchi tate uchi. All right, very literally, it means the tail of the carp strike, rising strikes. Now, it doesn't say anything about blocking there. We have always translated this to be fishtail blocking, but there is no mention of blocking there whatsoever. These are strikes. And how does that change your perception or your actual practice of the technique? Think about that a little bit. Koi no shippo uchi tate uchi. Koi no shippo uchi tate uchi. Koi is a carp, a Japanese carp. I know many of you know that. Shippo is the tail. So koi no shippo is literally the tail of the carp. Uchi is a strike. tate uchi, rising strike. Once again, let's do it together. Koi no shippo uchi, tate uchi. That's the fishtail blocks. The next, the wrist blocks side to side, are koi no shippo uchi, yoko uchi. Once again, tail of the carp strikes, side strikes, not blocks, strikes. Koi no shippo uchi, yoko uchi. Koi no shippo uchi, yoko uchi. Okay, next, the snapping eye strikes. Shomen hajiki. Shomen hajiki. Now, if you remember from the hajiki uke, hajiku means to snap upwards or inwards. And shomen, so it's literally just snapping to the front. There's no mention of what the weapon is or what part of the hand or body should be used. But this exercise is very simply called shomen hajiki, which means snapping to the front. And we have always translated that to be the snapping finger or eye strikes. Now, while we perform the Hojo Undo, we're introduced to a number of interesting terms and phrases and concepts, including different types of blocking, different types of striking, different types of kicking. So I'd like to take a second to go through a short list of the various blocks, punches, and kicks. Once again, this is in no way intended to be an exhaustive list of any way, shape, or form. We're just going to go very briefly through some basic techniques that I'm sure you're all going to come across in your karate practice inside the Uechi Dojo. Let's start first with the blocks. Now, in general terms, blocks and strikes and punches and kicks all take place in three areas. They are the Jodan area, or the high area. We usually correspond this with the head area. Jodan, that means high level. Next, the middle area or middle level, Chudan. And the low area or Gedan. Let's try those terms one more time. Jodan, Chudan, Gedan. Now, this isn't specific to blocking. As I mentioned a moment ago, you could have a Jodan tsuki, which is a high area punch. Okay, let's take a second to introduce a few blocks, however, using those terms. Jodan age uke. Jodan age uke. That roughly corresponds with a rising upper area block, or what we might call a high block in English. Jodan age uke. Okay, how about another very common one that you use in the dojo all the time, the low block, or the block that you see in some of the more advanced Uechi kata. Gedan barai. Gedan barai, or a low sweeping block, roughly corresponds in English to a low block. Of course, we also have our wa uke. Uke, of course, being the Japanese term for blocking. Wa uke, or circle block. You also have the mawashi uke, and that's the ones you see in kanshiwa and the rest of the more advanced kata. I always teach my class that the wa uke is the block with the hand coming across as a teaching guide. When you remove the hand as a teaching guide, we like in my school to call it the mawashi uke, or the turning block, the round block. And so we make our designation that way when we teach the students. Wa uke is hand across as a teaching guide, and all of the circle blocks that you see in the kumites, kyu kumite, and in the dan kumite, the circle blocks you see in the kata are mawashi uke. And then another very common block, popular block, is teisho uke, or the palm heel block, teisho uke. Okay, let's move ahead to our tsukis. Tsuki is a thrust, or what we roughly translate in English to mean a punch. And we have a various number of tsukis. And I'm not going to go through them all, but let's take a second and go through the most common ones. We have shomen tsuki, or seiken tsuki, which is a front punch or straight punch. We also have the corresponding gyakuzuki. Gyakuzuki. Gyaku in Japanese means reverse, and zuki or tsuki is punch, so reverse punch, gyakuzuki. We've already introduced the furizuki or mawashi tsuki, which is the round punch, or you might want to call it like a hook punch, although in Japanese they borrow the term fuku, which is the Japanese term for hook punch. Okay. Also, we have junzuki, or kizamizuki, which is the lead punch, might roughly correspond with a boxing jab, and I use that quite a bit in sparring. Kizamizuki. Junzuki. Jun, preparation. The word jun, to prepare or to lead. So a junzuki would be a lead punch. Kizamizuki, also roughly corresponding with the same type of technique, a lead punch. Let's move ahead to our keris, or geris, which are the kicks. And once again, how many kicks can you think of in karate? There's hundreds, right? But we're just going to go through the main few. And our first kick, most important kick in Uechi Ryu, is shomen geri, or front kick. Shomen to the front, geri kick. You also hear quite a bit about the sokusen geri, which is the same type of kick in Uechi Ryu. Soku means the foot, sen, the tip. So the tip of the foot kick is sokusen geri. Now the reason why this is different from the shomen geri is that sokusen could be tip of the foot round kick. It could be tip of the foot front kick. We don't really differentiate, but a sokusen geri is tip of the toe or tip of the foot kick. A 45-degree angle kick, or kind of a snapping kick, as we introduced already, sokuto geri. Sokuto geri, soku, foot, toe, blade of the foot kick. A true side kick, as in Kyu-kumite number 4, or the thrusting side kick, is yoko geri. Yoko geri, yoko meaning side. A back kick, ushiro geri. Ushiro geri. Ushiro meaning back. Once again, a roundhouse kick. Mawashi geri. Mawashi geri. A flying kick. Tobi geri. Tobu in Japanese means to fly. So tobi geri is a flying kick, or what's roughly corresponds with a jump kick. Also, some schools practice a two-level kick, or a jumping front kick in the dan kumite, and that can be translated to be a nidan geri, or a two-level kick. So you bring up your left leg with a fake hop forward with that right front kick, and we call that nidan geri. Okay. Interestingly, knee strike, if you were to grab somebody and apply the knee, falls under the term and topic of geris or keris, and so the Japanese call a knee strike a hizageri. Hizageri, knee strike. Let's move ahead to our uchis, or a different type of strikes that you come across in the kata. We have hiji uchi, or hiji tsuki. That's the elbow strike. Okay, I've also heard this introduced as empi uchi, or empi tsuki. Empi, or hiji, is the elbow. Okay, once again, our back fist strike, uraken uchi. Uraken uchi, or tsuki, right? Back fist. Shuto uchi. Shuto uchi is the knife hand, right? Karate chop, the most famous technique in karate. Shuto uchi. Next, not very common to Uechi Ryu, but very common to karate practitioners around the world, haito uchi. Haito uchi, that's the ridge hand strike, striking with the forefinger and the opposite side of the hand. Shoken uchi, or shoken tsuki, is a one-knuckle punch. The very common palm heel strike in Uechi Ryu, or the thumb strike in Uechi Ryu, is called a boshiken. Boshiken, not bushken. That's very commonly mispronounced. Bushken, it's not. It's boshiken with an O. Boshiken. Okay, a couple maybe less familiar ones. Kokken uchi. Kokken uchi is kind of like a wrist strike. All right, and lastly, we have our nukite, which is a spare hand. Nukite, that could fall under the term nukite uchi or nukite tsuki. And tetsui uchi. Tetsui uchi, that is the hammer fist that is first introduced in kanshu kata. Tetsui uchi. Okay, and something that isn't really discussed much in the Hoju Undo, but I guess we'll cover it here, are the few different stances that we run into in Uechi Ryu. Stances are dachi or tachi in Japanese. So let's take a second. Of course, our first and most famous stance in Uechi Ryu is the sanchin dachi. Sanchin dachi. When you have your feet together and even, we have hei soku dachi. Hei means even, soku, foot, dachi, stance, so even foot stance, hei soku dachi. When your heels are together, getting ready to bow, for example, you might have musubi dachi. Musubi dachi. Now, I can't know for sure, but musubu in Japanese means to tie, so I wonder if they're referencing the fact it looks like your ankles are tied together there when you're in that type of stance. Musubi dachi. A neutral stance is heiko dachi. Heiko dachi. Cat stance in Uechi Ryu. Either neko ashi, okay, neko meaning cat, ashi is foot, neko ashi, or neko dachi. Neko dachi. Then a few stances that we don't really see too much in Uechi Ryu, but you might want to be familiar with. First, the leaning forward stance. For example, in Seisan, when you lean forward to do the elbow strike, you have Zen Kutsudachi. Zen Kutsudachi, leaning forward stance. When you're leaning back, most of the weight on your rear foot, we have Ko Kutsudachi. Ko Kutsudachi. And then one of the most famous stances in karate, we have Keibadachi. Keibadachi, which is a horse stance. And so in very short terms, we've covered blocks, punches, kicks, striking, and some basic stances. But in no way, shape, or form have we created an exhaustive list of these many various concepts, terms, and strikes. Okay, moving ahead. In the next section, we're going to cover the Uechi kata and the proper pronunciation of those kata in Japanese terms that you often hear in and around the dojo. Okay, now in studying and pronouncing the Uechi kata, let's remember this important point. We have our three main katas, of course, Sanchin, Seisan, Sansei Ryu. And combined with Kanbun Sensei's name and his instructor, Shushiwa, we come up with all of the sounds that we need to make all of the Uechi kata. Once again, Sanchin, Seisan, Sansei Ryu, Kanbun, Shushiwa, and some combination thereof will lead us to the proper pronunciation of each of the Uechi kata. Let's review all 8. Number 1, of course, Sanchin. Literally, that's 3 wars, or what's roughly translated to 3 conflicts, and we know those to be the mind, body, and spirit. Sanchin. The next kata, Kanshiwa. Kanshiwa. Once again, Kanbun, Shushiwa, Kanshiwa. The next kata, Kanshu. Kanbun Sensei's Kan, Shushiwa Sensei's Shu, Kanshu. This is also known as the kata Daini Seisan, which is literally the second Seisan. And it's very interesting that when you learn both kata, you can see that all respects to Kanye Sensei, Kanshu is quite a bit of a ripoff of Seisan kata, and maybe, a very purposeful introduction to a more advanced kata, but many of the moves of Seisan show up first in Daini Seisan or Kanshu kata. Next, kata number 4, Seichin. That is Seisan's Se and Sanchin's Chin. Now, I've heard this pronounced quite a bit as Seiching or some other variation thereof. It is, in fact, Seichin. The 5th and maybe the most famous kata, Seisan. Seisan. And in Chinese, we find this to mean 13. And some people have formulated the opinion that it's 13 positions somehow, or 13 movements of attack and defense, or something thereof. And I've never been able to substantiate that, but in any event, 13, sei-san. Following that, the kata sei-ryu. Okay, once again, sei-san sei, san sei-ryu's ryu. Okay, now I've heard this pronounced as sei-rui, or say this or say that. It is in fact sei-ryu, sei-ryu kata. The next kata, kan-chin, kan-chin. Kanbun sensei's kan, Sanchin's chin, kan-chin kata. In the last kata in the Uechi system, kata san-sei-ryu, san-sei-ryu. And once again, in Chinese, we find this to mean san 3, sei 10, ryu 6, 36, perhaps 36 positions, again, of attack and defense, or 36 movements, or some other meaning that has been lost along the way. We're not exactly sure where the relevance of these names comes in some instances. Now, in the performance of a Uechi practice, during the actual class, we're going to run into a number of terms and phrases that should be defined here. For example, let's just take the start of Sanchin kata, for example. The instructor might call, Hai, seiretsu. Seiretsu, sei means proper, retsu means line. So let's get into proper lines. In other words, seiretsu, and the class would line up. Sanchin kata, calling out the exercise. Hidari ashi mae, hidari ashi mae. Hidari in Japanese means left. Ashi is foot. Mae means front or forward. So literally, let's do Sanchin kata with the left foot forward. Hidari ashi mae. Right foot forward. Migi ashi mae. Migi means right. Migi ashi mae. And so you have the commands, and you know how you're going to start the kata and what kata you're going to be doing. Next, the instructor might call, Kiotsuke! Kiotsuke. Ki, your mind or your spirit. Otsuke, literally turn on your mind or pay attention. Kiotsuke. And then next, shomen ni rei. Or very simply, rei. Shomen ni means to the front. Rei, R-E-I, or rei in Japanese means to bow. And just going off on a quick tangent here, when you're working with a partner in class, obviously not during kata, but in any of your two-person exercises, the sensei might call otagai ni rei, and that would mean bow to each other. Bow to each other, otagai ni rei. And then a very important concept in the dojo, and something we're very diligent in teaching at our school, is the essence of the phrase onegai shimasu. Very, very important in Japanese that you learn that early on in your karate practice or in your life in Japan, asking favors of others, onegai shimasu, and translated in so many different ways. I beg your favor, or I ask of you this request. And when our students work with one another, and surely when I trained and lived in Japan, I would say this phrase over and over again throughout my day, onegai shimasu, and it means let's get along, let's work hard together. I ask you to be your best so that I can be my best. However you choose to define it yourself. Very important concept. It's the concept of cooperation, the concept of working together. So when you work with each other, the sensei might call otagai ni rei, let's bow to each other. And as you're bowing to each other, you might say onegai shimasu, let's be our best, or please help me with this, or I beg your favor. Also, my class says to me, my advanced class, when I tell the class to bow for their kata, they all say to me at the same time, onegai shimasu, which is a kind of way of asking me to watch their kata and to help them progress in their karate practice. After the bow, the instructor may tell you yoi, which means ready, become prepared. Hajime means begin. Hajimeru means to start in Japanese. So hajime is a command to start. Hajime. As you finish up your kata, the instructor may call yame, which means to stop. Yameru means to stop in Japanese, and the command is yame. A couple other things that come up in kata, especially in Sanchin, is the command mawaru or mawate, or what we call our class out, we call tenshin, which from the tenshin exercises you'll remember is to turn your body. So as you're performing Sanchin, you may hear mawate, which means to turn around, or tenshin, literally turn your body. In a lot of American dojos, you hear the term magaru or magate. Magaru really means more kind of to bend. For example, if you were to bend a piece of metal, you would magaru, you would bend it or turn it. So although there is a turning element to the verb magaru or magate, it's really more kind of meaning to bend. So we use mawate in our dojo or tenshin. I have not heard magate used in a Japanese dojo, although it may be used in some instances. Also, the concept of zenshin in kata, which is the mindset before the kata or the mental preparation you do before you begin, zenshin. And at the end of your kata or any of your exercises, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of zanshin, which is the aftermind or the lingering spirit in your kata as you study your opponent, maybe watching for their next move, or as you show that readiness to continue if you need to at the end of your kata. Zenshin, the before mind, very literally, and zanshin, or the aftermind, the lingering spirit in your kata. During a Uechi class, or while you're moving around the dojo, you might become familiar with a lot of different terms. I'm going to introduce some here in no particular order. Number one, your uniform is a gi. Gi means clothing in Japanese, so you may call your uniform a do-gi, which is the clothing you wear when you're practicing the do, or the way. You may call your uniform a karate-gi, or clothing for karate. You may call it keiko-gi, which is, keiko means practice in Japanese, so it's practice clothing. Of course, you tie your obi, which is your karate belt, and you do this all inside of the dojo, and I don't mean to insult anybody's intelligence. Dojo, very important term, the way place, or the place where you learn the way. Your instructor is sensei. I know some senior instructors who prefer to be called shihan, which means master. And while we're there, we're going to be practicing our basics, or kihon. What is the Uechi Ryu kihon kata, or basic kata? And of course, you would all answer me, it is the kata sanchin. Kihon means basics. While you're practicing, you might use dogu, which is training equipment. Or if you're practicing your sparring, you might use bogu. Bo means defensive in Japanese, and gu is equipment, so it's safety equipment or defensive equipment. Also, while you're in the dojo, you may be performing kumite. Kumiyao or kumiyawase means to put together in Japanese. Te, of course, is hand, so kumite is the putting together or the crossing of hands, or what we roughly translate to mean sparring. There are two types of kumite in the dojo. Yakusoku kumite. Yakusoku is a promise or a prearranged exercise. So yakusoku kumite is, I know what you're doing, you know what I'm doing, let's practice this exercise together. Jiu kumite. Jiu in Japanese means free or freedom, and so it's free sparring. Jiu kumite is free sparring. Of course, while you're sparring, you're going to be using many different waza or techniques. Waza means technique. In those techniques, you're going to want to demonstrate the proper kime, which is focus. Kime means focus. Also, when you're sparring or when you're doing any type of exercise, you're going to want to work on your kamae, which is your posture or your stance that you take before you start your exercises. And of those exercises, let's talk for a minute of the Uechi Ryu practice of kote kitae. Now, you hear this mispronounced all over the United States and all over the world as kote kite or some variation thereof. Kote in Japanese is the forearm. Kote. Kitairu in Japanese means to strengthen or to condition or to forge, as some people say. So kote kitae literally means to strengthen or to condition the forearms. Ashi kitae is leg conditioning, ashi meaning the leg or the foot. And so ashi kitae is the leg conditioning. You may also perform bunkai in the Uechi Dojo. Bunkai in Japanese means an analysis. And some people mistranslate this to mean it's the application practice of the kata. Application in Japanese is oyo. Oyo. So although we're looking at some of the application, I think more clearly translated, bunkai is an analysis of the kata. It's kind of breaking it apart and seeing what it's all about. Bunkai. Some other words that you might come across as you're doing your training is the concept of tori and uke. A tori, for example, in Seisan Bunkai would be the person performing all of the movements. And the uke in Seisan Bunkai would be the person receiving all of the movements. So for example, if I were attacking my partner in the middle in Seisan Bunkai, I would be an uke. I'm the one who's kind of getting smashed around or demonstrated on. The tori would be the person in the middle performing all of the various blocks, punches, and kicks. Okay? And then as you're training along, just a couple of quick terms you might want to know that if you're practicing kicks, for example, and the instructor calls out hantai, he or she wants you practicing with the opposite side. Or your instructor may call out kotai, and kotai again means just switch sides, please. So you might be doing kicks, migi ashi mae, which is right foot forward, and then the instructor would call out kotai or hantai, and we're just working from the opposite side now. At the end of class, very famous ritual in Uechi Ryu is the concept of seiza, and sei again means proper, za is sitting. So the instructor may call out seiza, and the class would kneel in seated posture. In my school, we go through a process of meditation. So I call out to the class, mokuso. Mokuso literally means meditation, so a moment of meditation. After we go through a minute or two of this, I call to the class, kaimoku. Kaimoku. Moku is the eyes, and kai means to open, so it's an opening of the eyes. I ask the class to open your eyes now. Kaimoku. And then all together, once again, shomen ni rei, and we bow to the front. The instructors turn and face the class, and we call otagai ni rei. Remember, otagai ni means to each other. Rei means bow, so I'm asking the class, let's bow to each other. And then that all famous saying, Gokuro sama. Now there literally is no translation for this in English. We would not say something like this, and it's not easy to translate. Gokuro sama. Go is an honorific term. Kuro is a hardship. And sama, once again, an honorific term referring to a person's status above you. So literally, it means you're a very tired, important person, or you've gone through great efforts or great toils. And so the instructor recognizes the efforts of the class by saying Gokuro sama, which means, you know, in English, maybe thank you very much for your hard work in class tonight. The class responds, Arigato gozaimasu. Arigato gozaimasu. Now, that means thank you tonight and thank you for your ongoing efforts. Without getting into a grammar lesson, if the class were to say arigato gozaimashita with the shita ending there, that would mean thank you for what you did. By saying arigato gozaimasu or gozaimasu, it tells the instructor thank you for your ongoing efforts, both tonight and every night. And some classes end by the class saying gambarimashou. Gambarimashou. I've heard some schools say gambatte-mashou. That is improper grammar in Japanese. Gambaru means to do one's best or to quote-unquote go for it. In some schools say gambarimashou, so the whole class yells out in unison saying let's do our very best. This is just a quick list of beginning class or beginning kata terminology, terms and things that you might come across inside the dojo, and then kind of an end of class breakdown for some of those difficult terms that we run into class to class. Okay, let's conclude the program using Japanese that you may already know. or how we can sound like we know how to speak Japanese without really knowing any Japanese. Specifically, what I'm speaking of is what's called gairaigo, or foreign loanwords that have been imported into Japanese from English. The Japanese media continues to use a lot of words that's to sound a little bit more international in their speech and writings, and as such, many English terms have now become standard Japanese terms. So in this way, if you're unable to explain something in Japanese, sometimes it's worth a try to say it in English, just using Japanese pronunciation. And in many cases, you might even be able to get your message across. Remember that English language is part of the Japanese compulsory education. So almost all Japanese people that you run into are going to know some English words. For example, when you're training and fighting and you want to practice a 1-2, in Japanese that's recognized as 1-2. So just by putting a little Japanese spin on that English term, we come up with something that's recognizable in both languages. Also, timing in Japanese, for example, the timing of a proper punch is taimingu. Power is related in Japanese as pawa. A punch in Japanese, of course, is tsuki, but if you didn't know that, you might get away by saying panchi. A punch, panchi. Low kicks are often referred to in Japanese as ro kiku. Ro kiku. Okay, your guard, to put your guard up, is gado. An uppercut is an appa. The first part of uppercut, appa. And we mentioned earlier in the program that a hook punch is referred to as a fuku. Fuku. Your balance in karate is referred to as baransu. Baransu. And more dangerously, street fight, if you're speaking of street fights to a Japanese instructor or a Japanese training partner, street fighto. Street fighto. Okay. And again, Japanese are not unfamiliar with English. Just by slowing down a little bit, you might actually get your point across. And that does it for our basic Japanese for the Uechi Dojo audio course. How did you do? You're going to have to stop and press your rewind button and go through those tracks again. I want to take a second and thank you all for listening and congratulate you for establishing yourself as one of the best in Uechi Ryu Karate Do. Now, why do I feel this way? It's because just by purchasing or listening to this recording, you prove yourself to be a serious student, both of our art and of the specific details and traditions that make it so special. And let me conclude by saying that if you're an expert or native speaker of the Japanese language and you find discrepancies in the material presented in this course, or if you have any questions or would like to purchase additional copies of this program for yourself or your dojo, please contact us at Corey's Karate Academy at 978-858-0123. Once again, you can reach us at Corey's Karate Academy at 978-858-0123. Or you can find us on the web, of course, at uechiru.com. Folks, thanks for your attention. This has been Gary Corey. I hope you enjoyed the program. Domo arigatou gozaimashita. Sayonara. Goodbye.